All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Caro, and I'm a volunteer with nofamass. And you are attending Dumping the Bag, Garden Fertility Without Purchased Inputs with Al Johnson. And Al is a longtime NOFA stalwart and currently serving as the vice president of the NOFA, treasurer now of the NOFA New Jersey board of directors, and still an organic inspector?
Yes.
Awesome, wonderful. Al and I have known each other a long time. And so before we jump in, I do just have a couple of details to review with you. So, this conference is being presented on land that has been stewarded by Indigenous people since before European colonization. And as we work to heal the destruction caused by colonization, we appreciate your support, solidarity, and continued learning. If you are joining online, which I think right now is just Lisa, please feel free to drop into the chat whose land you're calling in from today. And with Buen Vivir as our theme, we aim to bring to light the ancestral wisdoms of the indigenous people of the Global South, including the Amara, Quechua, and Mapuche people. And we celebrate the restorative agriculture is rooted in longstanding cultural practices of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. This is an opportunity. There is an opportunity this afternoon with the caucus to join a group to further our learning together. And on this slide are a few slides that, or a few organizations that are ways that you can get involved and help to advance and center racial equity in your communities. We recognize this list isn't exhaustive, so if you have suggestions for things that should be on this list, feel free to share them with the organizers in the Whova app. And then, of course, we do have a number of sponsors who do make our conference possible, and we encourage you to purchase from them and let them know that you support nofamass and NOFA and all the NOFA chapters. And I believe at that point, oh yes, and sorry, we have some number of job openings, or NOFA has a number of job openings, so I encourage you to check those out if you want to be part of this awesome team. I worked for NOFA for 10 years, and it's a great place to work. And with that, I think that we will switch over to Al, and you'll just need to give me a second to change the slideshow and post that, and then we'll get going. So Al, I'm just going to move your presentation into the right screen and get you going. All right, and we'll hit presenter view. And then I will turn this around and hand it over to you. Is that okay, full screen like that? All right, and you should have your...
Oh, you get this also.
How's that?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm kind of used to, I'm hyper when I'm talking, so I'm used to using the whole front. But I think I'm supposed to stay here for the screen. Is that right?
Yes, and okay. I have to spotlight. One moment, I do have to spotlight. Sorry, I just realized you're not spotlighted, and I just have to fix that. Sorry.
I don't need to be on screen.
I think you do, but I'm gonna fix that in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So I will try and get started.
Okay.
So thank you all for coming. I have spent a lot of time farming and gardening over the course of my life, and I've gotten pretty good at being able to build up soil fertility. And I have pretty much been able to do it without purchased inputs, such as bag compost. But I want to make one disclaimer. I do use bag compost. I use it in my strawberries because I try to get my strawberries to last as many years as possible, and I want to put some compost in there that I know has been gone through the heating process and doesn't have any weed seed in it. Because once you get an established bed of strawberries, if you don't have any weeds, you can keep it for a long time. If you get weeds in there, you've got to start over again. And then I also have tried it this past year, growing garlic as per Richard Robinson's method, who's giving a workshop at 2. A very interesting method of growing garlic. So if you're interested in that, I would highly suggest going to that workshop. So I'm going to kind of segregate this into 3 main components, and some other ones too. Compost. I'll talk a little bit about compost because probably most of you, are aware of compost. Or you may already have a method. And then I'm going to talk about the use of inputs such as leaves and shells and things like that. And then probably the majority of the time, we're going to be talking about cover crops. and particularly not just what they are, how to plant them, but then also how to manage them once you've got them planted. So basically, compost doesn't have to be anything, anything fancy. It can be just a heap. Now, the issues with a heap is that, squirrels get in there, they take things away, so you kind of lose some of your bulk. If you can contain it, you're a lot better. But the purpose is really to grow, healthy looking vegetables like this. If I like to get the audience participation. So if any of you have good or bad experiences with any of these composting methods, let me know. I have a lot of friends that have different types of composters, and some of them are barrels and some of them are like this. And if I were to buy one, if I was in a smaller place and I was to buy one, I would probably get this one. The one thing about the management is that things can mat down a little bit, and the composting can get kind of slow. It might go even a little bit anaerobic. But if once a month you just take a digging fork or a pitchfork, and just loosen it up a little bit, it seems to do fine. The concept is you put things in the bottom and there's a little shelf. You put things in the top, there's a little shelf in the bottom, you pull things out, and probably takes a half a year or more to decompose. There's different versions of this. This is larger if you have a larger space, but it works with the same principle. There are several types of rotating composters. Some people like them and some don't. This is a rather large one. It's probably pretty expensive, but most garden supply stores have the small ones. One of the issues there is that if you're just putting your kitchen garbage in there, it's usually kind of wet. And some of these don't have a way to let moisture out. So if you do use one of them, you might have to have some hay or straw or leaves or something like that to put in once in a while. Does anybody have experience with some of these that they want to share? Go ahead, man.
I've got two of the hot plastic drums
Yes.
rotate, and I like that because I fill up. I'm working with one and letting one rest and decompose, and then we switch twice a year.
So Lisa, I don't know if you heard that, but the comment was that she has two of the rotating drums, so she can let one age while she adds to the other.
Otherwise, you're just putting new stuff on top of the old stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Good. If you have an apartment or a small place, worm composters, they're available commercially. The idea is you fill up one. You do need to add some carbon to these things. Again, it's kitchen. Usually for kitchen scraps. The directions say to use shredded leaves, but you can use straw. There's shredded newspaper, but you can use straw, shredded leaves, anything like that you can get for carbon. I actually cut up paper egg cartons to use in my compost a lot. It's a 3 or 4 tier system, and the liquid will come down the bottom, so you can use this as a liquid fertilizer. And basically when it comes out, it's pretty well made compost. And then you get worms there too. Yes, go ahead.
I do have a worm bin compost. I keep it in my basement because the temperature stays about right for them all year round. I have found when I've used it a little bit that there's a lot of seeds left in there.
Seeds, oh yeah.
It's not bad. I get a lot of sprouting tomatoes and things like that.
Yeah.
And I've used sawdust, leaves, shredded newspaper, and also shredded office paper, which I'm not so comfortable about.
Yeah. So Lisa, the comment was that she has a worm bin. She puts carbon in basically. Yeah. But she does get a lot of weed seeds because it's cold composting. I don't do any hot composting, so I get those weeds too. That's why.
Al, it sounds like the audio is so good that folks online can actually hear the
okay.
in the room.
All right,
so
good.
I
don't have to waste time.
Thank you.
So there's more sophisticated systems. You can make them out of cement blocks. This happens to be a 2-tier system where things are being added to one side and things are being composted on the other side. Not bad. After many years using many different types of compost system, I finally came up with my own system. It's a 3-tier system. The newspaper there is just there because it was just built. I don't put them in there anymore. But now, if you look at those are cedar posts. If you put cedar in the ground, it'll rot out at the ground level. But if you put it on top of the ground, especially if you put it on top of some rocks, it doesn't rot out. So this is now 17 years old, and there's no sign of rot on the bottom of those posts, but they're not in the ground. I could take the whole thing up and move it if I wanted. But one of the ideas here is that I put in the bin on your right-hand side. That's my fresh bin. And when that kind of fills up, then I move it to the second bin. Now, sometimes that really gets full and it's hard to move this stuff. So there's a little board that separates the two. And on the bottom of that's a little piece of hardware cloth, just to let air through. And that's in there attached with tractor pins. There's probably other varieties. Tractor pins you can get in any length, so they'll go right through that 4x4. That's one side, and that's the other side, a little clip there. So I can take those out, and then I just push things from one side to the other. And it's in the middle where most of the composting happens. That's where the real work is happening. But it doesn't get that hot. I probably could add some things to make it get hotter and kill some of those seeds, but I just don't. So I also like to, when you bring in tomato vines or pea vines or something like that, I also like to chop it up if I can. I happen to have a machete. I think a machete is a really good tool. Comes in handy for a lot of things. And it's not necessary, but it does, cause the compost to mat down a little bit more so you can fit more in. And it breaks into smaller pieces so it composts a little bit faster. This is what we call a Johnson-Su digester. It's basically shredded leaves over a long period of time. And I would have to get into a whole session on this. David Johnson and his wife, I can't remember his wife's name, but Sue. Sue's her last name, I think. Yeah. They gave a whole workshop on this. And there is an article on how to do this in one of the Natural Farmers from around 2018, if those of you have been members for a while and keep those old Natural Farmers. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get long-term compost in here that starts to grow some mycelium. And then I do try to, in most beds, I'll try to put a couple shovelfuls of this. And I don't know if, how effective it is. Johnson and Sue live in Arizona, and they say they water every day. And I've never watered this. I just don't believe it. I do put a little cap over the top, but it's a little more fertility. And again, I'm trying to get the mycelium in there for obviously for beneficial purposes. Now, bones. I found that this is a bucket. I put some bones in. I covered them with limestone. I don't remember how long I left it, but it was at least a year. I think it was more like 2. And after 2 years, that stuff just breaks down. It's some kind of a chemical reaction going on. I don't know what it is. But so, I could put the limestone on. I could mix this I could put the bone on. Bone's higher in phosphorus. The limestone's obviously higher in calcium. But it's another source of something I don't have to throw out. I've also tried like a little compost bin for leaves, and I haven't found it works quite as well. Maybe I just haven't managed it as well. But I make this little bin, which is just a plastic storage bin, and I cut the bottom out, put a screen on, put things on top, drill holes in the side, and then cover that with ideally chicken manure, because you want something fairly high in nitrogen. But it's hard getting enough water in there, and it's really slow. But you can experiment yourself with it. Now, the other thing, I love clams. So, what do you do with the clam shells? Well, I could always use some calcium, or I used to be able to use calcium. So at one point, I made this little block, about a foot square, and I put 2 eye bolts in the top. Now you got to put a washer and a screw on the bottom so that, if that was just a bolt, that might pull up. But once you have a washer and a screw on the bottom, it's never going to pull up. And I just put a little a rope between the two, and then I have my little block over there, and I just drop it. I drop it a number of times. Now some of this is already powder, and some of it is still needs to be chopped up a little bit more. But even I just throw this on the garden the way it is, because eventually it's gonna all break down. So just a way to use calcium, or get your calcium, and again, once in a while I will use a bag fertilizer, but only those 2 exceptions. Okay, you can buy or even go shovel things like mushroom compost. Now, mushroom compost is not as common around here as it is. I'm in New Jersey, but we're right across the river from Pennsylvania. I think there is a large mushroom farm in Connecticut somewhere. Anybody know where that is? Yeah, sometimes you can go. It's really good stuff. And even if you have it, if you take a truck there, if you have a truck, usually they'll load you up for just a few bucks because it's a resource they want to get rid of. So I don't have any technical ways of applying. I just usually take a shovel, put it on a shovel at a time, and kind of sprinkle as I go along. Or if I'm putting something in a hole like a pepper or something, I'll just dig a little hole and put a cup of compost in. Okay, so what are we looking at there? There are 2 raised beds. I grow in raised beds, but I don't use wooden sides. I don't. There's nothing wrong with them, but I don't believe in using them unless you have to. And in the middle is the pathway. This is a picture from probably November or December, and all my neighbors except for me rake their lawns. I let mine blow away into the woods, and then they put them out on the street for the town to come pick up. So I go around and get them before the town does, and I bring them home. And each one of my beds is full of leaves over the wintertime. Now, there's another advantage of this is that if that was just a dirt pathway, and I want to go out there in the wintertime, it's muddy. It's wet all winter long. It's muddy. I'm probably, disturbing some of the soil. And so it really creates a nice place to walk on. The disadvantage, it's a little bit more conducive to slugs. It's a little harder to control slugs when I use so much mulch. But that's basically what it looks like in the fall. And I have not shredded those. I now have a shredder I use for some special things like covering strawberries, but you don't actually need a shredder. And this is what it looks like in the springtime. It still looks fine. After you're walking on those for a while, if I were not to do anything with this by summertime, this time of year, you really wouldn't see any leaves there. They're pretty much broken down into little pieces. So I do use leaves specifically for strawberries, or solely for, not strawberries, raspberries. I grow, now I only grow, everbearer, fall bearing raspberries. So they're a little bit easy to manage because this is what the patch looks like in the fall. Those are all canes that came up in the spring, and I cut them back so that after I've gone through, you don't see anything. And I just cover the whole thing with leaves. It's about a foot thick, maybe not quite that much, and you walk on it and it settles a little bit, and it'll be quite a bit less than that. But so that's my only fertility that I've ever used in the raspberries, and we'll see a soil test from that later on. I'll show you what the soil test looks like. And the raspberries don't have any problem pushing up through the leaves by the springtime. That's basically what it looks like. So I'm going back to my beds now. It's spring, and it's ready. I'm ready to start shaping my beds. There's 2 ways I can manage that. When the leaves are in the pathways, so generally I take a rake. I'm on one side of the bed. I take a rake and I push the leaves back, and then I like to scrape that soil that's in the pathway because there's decomposition that's happening there, and there's been erosion from the year before that's ended up in the pathway. Not serious erosion, but I think that there's always good nutrients in the top inch of that pathway. So I try to scrape that top inch back into the bed. Occasionally, I will scrape them into the bed and put them, incorporate them into the bed. And that would be if I was coming back here with a cover crop, or if I was, I've done this with cucurbits, which I don't plant until early June. So if I did this in early April, it gives a couple months for that to decompose, and it may not quite be enough, but I haven't really noticed harm that. And the reason, my theory there is, it seems like any compost pile that has cucurbit seeds in it, like pumpkins or winter squashes, you always get these nice vines growing out. So I don't think it minds if the nutrients aren't completely decomposed. Basically I just chop that in. Of course, there's lots of other mulches that you can use. Straw. I prefer straw over hay because straw has fewer seeds, and if it has seeds, it's usually seeds of grains, which are a lot easier to control. And there are certain things I specifically use straw for, and that's potatoes, basically to give it some shade on the soil so the top potatoes don't turn green. Get my color straight. Okay, so let's talk about cover crops. I'm just going to give you a little overview. This is peas. This is a field of peas, vetch, and flax. I'm sorry, peas, oats, and flax. And there is a handout. Let's see. There's a handout that is online. It's on NOFA. So everybody should have access to it. I was told I didn't have to print them out, but I do have some extras here if anybody wants them. And it's basically some common cover crop seeds. Now, it's not all inclusive. There's other ones, but these are the ones that I use. Yeah, so I'm going to go through these one at a time. But on this handout, I also give you some suggestions on where to get it, where to buy it, because usually it's not available on a typical supply store. And what I usually do is I buy it in 1 or 2 pound increments from one of the seed catalogs, and it's got a legend for which seed catalog I get it from. And if you can get it locally, that's fine too. Problem you get it locally, sometimes it's treated seed, and the people in the store don't know that. They haven't come into it. Yeah, and I just store it. I find old coffee cans to be the best thing because it doesn't let any light through. I don't know that light would have any effect, but that seed on the right is a perennial rye seed, and it's probably 7 or 8 years old when I took this picture. It's even older than that now. And then I store them in the basement. Basements, like you say, your basement is a good place for worm composting because it's never too hot, never too cold. And if you're lucky to have a basement, if not, someplace like a closet would be fine. So again, this is I'll just go quickly. This is a rye field in November, a field of wheat and hairy vetch in November, and straight vetch in November, clover in the springtime. And again, I'll get into how to plant some of these. Okay, so planting techniques. Half of these cover crops are greens, and you've all had grain seed before. If you haven't had, cooked with wheat or whatever, but it's just like a piece of rice. And I just fill my hand up, and I just go back and forth like that. It's spreading, and I think I used to see Bible pictures of doing that when I was a kid. And that's how I got the idea. So if possible, I'll rake it in just a little bit. I don't want to rake it too deep because most of these are plants that have grown and their seed is naturally meant to fall on the top of the ground. Maybe get covered with some of the leaves from the plant. So they don't want to get planted too deep. I rake it in just a little bit if I have a chance. But even more important than that, if possible, is to tamp it in a little bit. And I don't have a good tamper. I just use the backside of my garden rake. And basically walk along and tamp it. Now, what you're doing there is the seed that's on the surface. You're pushing it so it's got a better contact with the soil, and it's going to stay moist longer, and you'll get better germination. And so this is an example of it's probably that same one you saw me planting. It would be a spring planting of peas and I believe oats, but you can see it's on the surface, but they're starting to germinate. Those oat plants are coming up. The peas are germinating. So I get pretty good success with that. Now, after you plant them, if you get them wet and then they go through a long dry period, then you can lose the crop. So you have to sometimes water, even in March. You plant some of these in March. You don't have to water in March. Well, yeah, you might have to. But there's several ways you can kind of keep the moisture in a little bit. One is using row cover. Now these are, I get these from Johnny's. They're about $60 for a 50-foot roll. You probably wouldn't need a 50-foot roll. But if you have a farm near you, a lot of times these things will get holes in them. And they may want to use them to keep out flea beetles or something like that. You don't need them for keeping out flea beetles. You need them for just keeping moisture. So you might be able to, ask them if you can have some of their scraps. And if you only need a 10-foot piece, then you probably can get a good 10 foot out of there. And again, it doesn't matter if it has holes. It's better if it doesn't, but it doesn't matter. But you can also cover that seed with a light covering of straw. This would not prevent weeds. A lot of times we use a mulch to prevent weeds. I'm not trying to prevent the weeds here, because if I put it on so heavy, I'm not gonna let my crop grow through. But you can see this is a clover, I believe, that was planted in the spring, and very light covering of straw. It just helps to keep the moisture in a little bit. Probably prevents it from drying out one day less than it would otherwise. And yeah, it doesn't, not just for clover. I did the same thing. I think this was with, this is in the fall. And I believe that's hairy vetch and rye, but same concept. So let's say you had carrots or something like that in one spot, and they were fall carrots, so you didn't get to take them out of the ground until it was too late to get a cover crop in. Doesn't mean you've lost the chance to get a cover crop, but there are several tricks. One is, you saw earlier planting the oats and peas in the spring, but this is March. March is when you get a lot of frost heaving in the soil. So if there's an open piece of ground, the ground will freeze at night, and when it freezes, it expands. In the daytime, it contracts. So there's ridges in there, what you call frost heaving. So what I did was I just broadcast some clover seed, because I wanted to get clover in here, and this is 2 weeks later. You can see there's no clover germinating on the tops of the soil, but in all those little holes, the clover is coming up, and I got a really good establishment. Now, a disadvantage of doing this is there's also some weeds in there too, and the weeds are going to grow and they're going to compete. But I actually do more hand weeding in my cover crops than I do in my, I use shovel hose for my crops, but I often go in and just pick those up. I don't want them to take over. They're probably just as good for the ground, but then they'll produce seed, which will be a problem for the next crop. Okay, so another way to establish, particularly clover, is if you grow cucurbits. Now, some of you have small gardens, and I wouldn't recommend cucurbits if you have a really small garden, because they take up too much space. Although something like cucumbers you can train to go up trellises. I have a whole bed that's cucurbits, different types, butternut squash, and cucumbers and melons, whatever. So there's a time when the plants start to spread. They start to, put out vines, and I can't get in there with my shovel hoe anymore, and I can't weed anymore. So, but the soil is starting to get covered. So at that point, I will go in and I'll broadcast clover in there. And it doesn't work every year, but, probably at least half the time, probably more than half the time, I can get that clover established under the cucurbit crop. And the leaves are providing some shade, so it'll keep it cooler and it'll keep it moister in there. Now, sometimes the leaves get too big, particularly when we talk about the winter squashes or the pumpkins. They get so big that they eventually kill the clover underneath because it's not getting any sun, or the rain will wash away and it doesn't get wet right underneath the leaves. So it's not perfect, but I've gotten some really good, I often get some really good cover crops established in that cucurbit bed. So basically that's going to be my fertility for the next year. And this is what it looks like, a little bit later. The butternut squash is growing right in within the clover. Now, there's several types of clover. I would only do this with a white clover because the white clover is not as big, it's not as aggressive. So I don't think it really competes with the cucurbit, but I have uses for other clovers too. And one of those I'll show you here. So in my let's say this is my cucurbit bed. The next one over is where I grow my early greens. It's lettuces, and I plant a lot of cilantro, and sometimes there's some early root crops like carrots and beets in there. And as I take them out, I put in clover. Now this is a red clover. Red clover is a larger plant. You're going to get more biomass, more nitrogen fixation, and it's not competing with the cucurbits. So that again, this is actually just a leftover leaf from something that was already cut. So there was a row of lettuce in there. It's been cut, and now I'm coming in with a clove. Now I've gotten a little bit better luck with planting a little bit of buckwheat with this. Because the buckwheat is so fast, it kind of shades the ground, and it does cause better germination. And I actually often plant that seed before I take the lettuce out, so that I can't really cover it all with straw at that point. But I found that a little bit of buckwheat, it really helps out. And the buckwheat's going to grow up. It's probably going to seed and die, and it might come back again. But it's not really. I don't consider it to be a weed. It's fine as part of the cover crop. Every year I get one of my best establishments, our most consistent establishments of cover crops under my tomatoes. This is tomatoes. It's early September. I've planted, I think this year was wheat and hairy vetch. And it's just starting to germinate. But again, that shade from the tomatoes, it's keeping the soil cool and moist enough that I'm getting pretty good germination under there. It's not going to grow a lot until the tomatoes start to die back a bit, but you'll see a picture later of how that looks in a little bit. So how do you manage it? Planting schedule. Again, on your handout, it's online. I've gone through pretty much all the cover crops that I've ever used. There's more, but it gives you an idea of when to plant. Like for instance, rye or wheat with vetch, best planted by 9/15. If it's just by itself, you can plant it all the way up to really to December. I planted December and probably not December, probably late February, late November in Vermont, and it took probably kind of lucky, but so to give you some planting dates, sometimes by itself or with field peas. And for instance, oat can be planted in the fall, or it can be planted in the spring. So there's several options there. And anybody have any questions on this? Okay, so remember that vetch and wheat crop under the tomatoes. The tomatoes are pretty much died down. This is early November, but you can see the cover crop's really starting to take off. Get a nice establishment there. Sometimes I plant vetch with the grain. The grains would be wheat, barley, rye, and I don't like to use rye if I don't have to, because it's so aggressive. If you don't till it in or catch it at the right time, it's it's really hard to incorporate into the soil. But grains are what do you call it? They're less. They don't last as long. If you have grain, in other words, let's say you buy a pound of wheat seed or rye seed, whatever, you use it, it's fine. By the next year, the worms might start hatching. So unless you put that occasionally in the freezer, it may not be have as much longevity as most of the other seeds. I find the clover, buckwheat, they all last for 4 or 5 years at least. But the grains might not. So this is an example. I planted vetch with some other grain, and the grain was not good anymore. So I only got the vetch. I had a nice stand of vetch, but I like to get the mix. I've mentioned several mixes. One is vetch with a grain. The other is the field peas with a grain. And one of the reasons is when you have a combination of a legume, which is the vetch or the peas, and you have that grass, the grass uses the nitrogen as it's being taken out of the air by the legume, so it causes it to produce more nitrogen. So you actually get a better nutrient value from it. This is okay. Yeah, this is the wheat and vetch. I think it's probably that place where the tomatoes were. It's in early April, so it's starting to green. It got a nice crop there. And think about what you put into your compost at home. I mean, this probably 10 times what you put in for a month, right here, and that's not even done growing yet. So this is a field of oats. Now, oats, this is November. Oats grows better in the cold weather. So it's a really good one to plant either early in the spring or ideally late or early in the fall too. I like to plant it in a bed that I'm going to plant early next year. So this might be my early greens next year. The reason being is in most winters it dies over the wintertime. It doesn't always die. I can't remember if last year. I don't think I planted it in the fall. So I'm not sure. I mean, it was pretty mild winter, but generally it dies down. So basically, I can just plant this in the spring. So again, this is oats. This one has planted not with vetch, but it's been planted with field peas. So this was, I think, planted in early April, and this is actually taken on May 6th. So I've gotten a pretty good growth out of it. It might have even been planted that year in March. It's hard to see the peas in there, but this is a couple weeks later, and you can actually see the pea vines growing. Again, the peas are the legume. It's going to be adding nitrogen. So another advantage of an oat crop in the spring is these little what do you call them? I forget.
Field peas?
No, the little
Tendrils?
was it? Yeah,
Tendrils?
tendrils. Yeah, tendrils. Yeah, they're all edible. So you can just go around and harvest them. It's like one of the first things we eat in the springtime is the little tendrils from the oat crop. And you're probably taking away a little bit of the composting value of the crop, but I don't think significantly. So remember, I said that I plant next to the cucurbit bed. I've got my early crop, and I've established. I'm trying to establish clover in there. That clover is not going to get real big, but I split my beds, 2 beds every year. So this is a bed that I had planted the previous year in clover. It had my greens, and last year's crop grew into it this way. Now my cucurbits are over the other side, and they're growing into this bed also. So this bed is basically resting for the summer. I have one bed that rests every summer, and this is it. It's usually I get a pretty good establishment of clover, and then the advantage of it is it gives the vines from the cucurbits room to grow an extra 6 feet over, because they you can't really confine them to a 4-foot bed. I'm going kind of fast, so if anybody has questions or comments, yes.
Actually, I just wanted to confirm for folks listening at home and for the audience that when you were saying that the pea tendrils are a benefit, you meant of the pea crop, not of the oat crop. Or the oats and peas mix.
Oats and peas mix. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just
confirm. But you only eat the tendrils of the peas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Sorry. There's one question in the chat.
Yep.
Can you speak to the length of time it takes to create nitrogen nodules on the roots of legumes? I was told it takes at least 6 months for them to create the nodules, and if they get tilled before that, you don't get the benefit. I
think that's true of clover. I'm not sure about a quicker growing crop like peas. But you don't get as much nitrogen. I don't think you get as much nitrogen fixation from peas as you do from clover. But yeah, all my clover is in there for probably at least a half a year. But peas are not. I'm trying to think. Vetch. I don't know about vetch. Yeah, it's a good question.
I can speak to the fact that when I've dug up fairly young pea crops, I will find nodules on them. But like you said, I think the clover builds up more nitrogen over time because it's in the ground longer. Yeah,
and I think, at least that's from you, I think if you have a vetch crop, it's better to leave it until later in the fall, later in the spring, not incorporate. I think if you incorporate it really early in the spring, I don't think you'd get much nitrogen out of it. I don't know if it does it in the fall. Other uses of clover. This is my garden again, but the beds that we looked at before, they go out this way, and this is basically the head row for all of them. Blueberries on the left, and they were young, and I got a pretty good crop of white clover established here. It's white clover because white clover it spreads on the ground, doesn't go up, and it has basically an indefinite life. Red clover will only last for a couple of years. So the problem is that some grasses get in there. It's just not completely clover anymore. But I'll show you one real advantage. This is the same bed. This is taken about a week ago. And you can see all the white clover in there. There are weed grasses coming in. But I actually, every year, I try to take that off. I put that right on the compost pile. I'm not afraid of the white clover seed getting in the compost because white clover is easy to control. but I like to get it before the grasses go to seed. So I think I've done this twice this year, and I probably won't do it again because I think those grasses are going to start going to seed. I don't want to put those grasses in the compost because they're, so basically I filled up the whole compost. And again, think of all the kitchen scraps you have at home. This is full. It's very high in nitrogen, I believe. Okay, right? Yeah. So in order for it to compost a little better, I keep some shredded leaves, and I try to mix them in. When I put something in the compost that's high in nitrogen, putting shredded leaves in, I think helps the decomposition process. Yes.
Do you turn your kitchen compost, or you just let it layer it with lasagna?
No, I think you might have missed it, Jan. I have a 3-bed system,
Okay.
and so when this fills up, I will move it from side to side, and I can take out boards in the middle and just kind of push it. Yeah. Good question though. Crimson clover is another clover. It's more of an annual. It reportedly will die over the winter time. I think I've had some make it through the winter, but it's more of an annual. So that might fix nitrogen a little sooner than some of the other clovers too. I don't know. I know Jack and Julie Rawson from Many Hands Organic Farm. They kind of turned me onto this crimson clover, and they use it extensively. It's beautiful. It's nice to have in there. You know what? I'll use that if I get an area like I told you under to curb it. Sometimes there's a dry area that the clover died that I tried to put underneath, and in the springtime I might plant some of the crimson clover to fill in areas that were that didn't quite make it. So again, this is clover. I think this is probably red clover, but you see the grass growing. That's actually not a weed. That is perennial ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass is one of the grasses you find in your lawns. Usually, most of your lawns are perennial. They're ryegrasses, perennial ryegrasses. They're bluegrasses and fescues. Yeah, and then probably clovers too. So I try when I've learned that the clover will fix more nitrogen if it's planted with a grass. I searched around and I found that of the lawn grasses, perennial rye is the quickest to grow and it's quickest to die. So I thought it would be the least competitive, and it probably has worked well in this way. But there's other issues with this. Is sometimes it takes over, and this is perennial ryegrass. It's nice, but when I get into managing the beds, I'll show you there's a little bit of an issue there. Now, sometimes that's so thick that I just cut it with my machete, and I use it for early spring mulches and garlic or onions or whatever. And a lot of times it's taking root in the pathways. You can see those clumps of ryegrass in this. I just leave it, and it's a source of compost. It's a source of mulch, and it's pretty effective. Yes, go ahead, Tim.
By seeds or by runners?
What's that?
Is that spread by seeds or by runners?
It's by, I think it's by seed, but once it's established, I think it seeds itself pretty quickly. So I like to get it cut before it does go to seed. I don't know if it's managed, but so I think it was originally by seed, but it's probably reseeded itself too. It is a little hard to get rid of. That's so one other thing that's on the list is daikon radishes. I forget what I call them on the field radishes, I think.
Tillage radish?
Tillage radishes, yeah. I guess it's got different names.
Okay.
It's ideal for planting in the late summer. If you have a place in the late summer, you can plant them. The plant itself will grow a daikon like this. That's like, there's just as much of that under the ground. So it's particularly effective if you have hard soil. Now, it is a member of the brassica family. And if you plant brassicas, broccoli, cabbage, whatever, kale, you got to watch the rotation because you don't want to plant too many brassicas, close together in time period. So I don't actually use it in my own garden. I take care of a church garden. We don't plant any brassicas, so I do use it when I get a chance at the church garden. There's a lot of biomass, and again, it's sending that root down there, and that root will just rot. So you get that kind of that hole that really softens the soil up. Okay, so Oh yeah. So let's say it's the summertime and you've got an open bed, early summer, whatever. So what do we do with that? You don't want to just leave it, open like this because it'll, the rain's going to wash a lot of those nutrients into the soil. So I try to use buckwheat. Now, again, this floating row cover can help establish buckwheat because buckwheat is a warm weather crop, so it likes to get planted in the summertime. But it's a really quick growing crop too. 5 weeks is all you need. So often help with germination because it's a hot summertime. I use the row cover. And this is, let's see, 12 days. Yeah, this is at 12 days. So I planted it's 12 days after seeding. This is 19 days. So you're starting to see some good germination, some good covering. And this is not a particularly thick crop. I usually get it thicker than this. I put more seed in now when I plant it. But this is 26 days. So it's almost 4 weeks. And then the ideal time to incorporate is when it's at 10% bloom. Like, how do you know when it's 10% bloom? You have to wait till it's 100% bloom and then say, oh, it should have done it too, a week or a half ago. But it's when you start to see a few flowers here. Now, the reason for this is it'll grow more. You get a little bit more biomass, but it'll start to get kind of woody and it'll start to open up the canopy. So buckwheat is also an effective weed suppressor. Now, this crop was not quite thick enough to get really good weed suppression, but this is about 5 weeks. So at this point, I incorporate it into the soil. I'll show you what happens if you let it go a little bit long. And this is, I think it was a different planting, but this is actually almost 6 weeks. So this is probably more than 50% bloom. And it's still pretty good. This is a thicker crop, so I got better shading of the soil. And probably better weed suppression. But so here's one trick with buckwheat. You see those flowers? Bees love buckwheat flowers. You can buy buckwheat honey in the fall, but the flowers close up at around noontime, midday, sometime around there. So if you want to manage this, whether it be cut it and take it to the compost pile or try to chop it in with a hoe, rototiller, whatever. Wait until like mid-afternoon at least. Otherwise, the bees become very agitated when the flowers close up. And if they see you there, they think you're closing the flowers up on them. And so they'll come after you. So 5 weeks, often I have a bed that I want to keep open all summer. I'm going to plant my fall, let's say garlic or something, or rascus in it. And so I want to get 2 crops of buckwheat in. So the second one is usually easier to establish because basically what I did was I came through with a scythe, could be a lawnmower, and I just cut the crop down, and then I just broadcast the second crop of buckwheat in here, and it's already created that shade. It's not so thick that it shades out and kills the seed, but there's enough light getting through there that I get really good germination, and then I've got like a whole summer worth of 2 buckwheat crops. Fertility for me. Okay, soil tillage, incorporation, and bed preparation. Okay, so you got several choices. Some of you may have a rototiller. I don't have a rototiller, and I don't use any power equipment in the garden because I teach a lot of classes, and I can't see saying, oh yeah, you can do this. All you have to do is take your rototiller, and when only one person in the room has a rototiller. So several ways. But I do cut it. I do have a scythe. I think the 2 people downstairs might have scythe. And I also have my machete, so I can cut it. Or you can go over it with a lawnmower, set it high. I don't like to use my lawnmower in the garden because I figure I'm bringing weeds in from the lawn. But you can. It's a lot easier. So I have two options here. One is to just chop it into the soil. The other is to take it to the compost pile. I've done either. There's my scythe. That happens to be a clover crop. Even if I'm going to just chop it in, I do want to cut it. It makes it easier to handle. But I'll often take it to the compost pile. Just like you saw that white clover along the fence. This is my compost pile filled up with the clover from the bed. So I can also use it as mulch for this is an early cutting of clover, and I just use it for mulch for my young onion plants there. But most of it I chop in with a hoe. You know, I don't have any particular fancy hoe, and it's some work. You know, I'm fairly fit, and you're actually trying to cut it as you incorporate it. So this is a clump of one of the grain grasses, probably, let's say it's wheat, and I've already tried to cut it as close to the ground as possible in small pieces, but I'm going to have to get that clump cut up, and you can cut right through the clump with a hoe. But you don't necessarily dislodge everything the first time through. Now, my beds are about 30 foot long. It takes me about 30 minutes to do the first hoeing, and it's hard work. You know, don't do it on a real hot day. Do it in the evening, and you know, take a break if you need to. But I always go through these beds about 4 times. So the second time through, it only takes about 10 minutes. What I'm doing the second time through, I'm breaking up these clods. You know, the grass is still attached to the root. So there's a decision to make whether or not you cut this and take it to the compost pile, or you cut it and you incorporate that into the soil. So when the cover crop's about 1 foot tall, then I usually just use my hoe and incorporate it all in. When it gets to be a couple feet tall, then I say that's too much. It's going to be too much work, and I'm not going to be able to get it into it. So then I would take this to the compost pile. So this would be bed of clover after the first hoeing. So basically, I've gotten most of it broken up. You see a lot of green in there, and then this is what it looks like after the second hoeing. It's probably about a week after the second hoeing. It's just about ready for the third. You can see I haven't killed all the clover yet, but you start to see less clover there. It's getting incorporated into the soil because it's high in nitrogen. It's breaking down fairly quickly. Yeah, just another example. This was a field of oats. I think it's the bed of oats. I think it's the one you may have seen earlier. And this is after its first hoeing. Lots of green, but the soil looks pretty. You can tell the soil looks pretty nice there. Now here's my perennial rye. This is the problem, child. Sometimes the perennial rye takes over from the clover. And I think if you look carefully, you can see some of it starting to seed up. And I don't want that to happen. I want to try to get it out of this. So I'll cut it back, and then I'll try to chop it up. But now this is really difficult. If any of you ever tried to like hoe a lawn for a new garden, you know how hard it is. Or even rototill. These clumps really hold together. Great for soil, soil building, soil erosion, but difficult to handle. So I will still do this. I will still go through and chop it a couple times. But eventually I've got these tufts of roots left. I'd love it if they were still in the soil and they were dead, but I'll get to that a little bit. I've tried a few things with that a little bit later. So what I do is basically I just push those all to the side of the bed, and they kind of create a mulch on the side of the bed. And then I've got a clear bed to plant into. So this is one of those beds we looked at earlier after it's been hoed 4 times. Again, the first time takes about a half an hour, second time maybe 10 minutes, and after that it's even less. The soil becomes really easy to handle after that. And then kind of going back to what you saw earlier, I scraped some of that soil from the pathways for my beds. And I like to loosen my beds before I plant, even though I've got pretty good soil. And I just use this digging fork, it's Smith & Hawken. It's actually made by the Bulldog Tool Company, so they're still available. It's a heavier duty digging fork than I've ever found anywhere else. It takes a little while. You can also get one of these broad forks. You don't have to do this, but broad fork will make this job a little bit easier. But I've got my digging fork, and it doesn't take that long. So it's not, for me, it's not worth investing in the broad fork. So I will try to rake the bed, get it ready to plant. This is a bed that had a cover crop on it. I don't remember what it was, but it's been worked for a month, and it's doing fine. So I want to look at a couple of soil samples. Now this is I started this garden site in 2006, and this was after the first year. And the year before, I would have spread some mushroom compost. Not an awful lot, but I spread some mushroom compost. So I had some inputs already. But if I want you to look at several things, the soil pH is 6.7. The organic matter is 3.3. Now, neither of them are bad. But after, let's see, after 9 years, I took another soil sample. My pH was up to 7.1, which is a little higher than I'd like. I like the ideal soil pH is between 6.5 and 7. But my organic matter is up to 5.7. So that's really good. So I'm friends with Rutgers agronomist Joe Heckman. I said, Joe, what do I do about my soil pH? He said, well, the first thing I would do, stop putting in your shells and stop putting in your, the clam shells and stop putting in the egg shells. So I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll try that. And let's see, is this, oops, sorry. I don't know how to fix this. Okay, and this is 2021. You can't see it from there. But the organic matter is up here still 5.5 to 5.7. And then where's the pH? I'm sorry, because this moved, the yellow is supposed to be line, but the pH was down to 6.9. Not a big difference, but I'm starting to get my pH to come down a little bit. And if it's under 7, I'm real happy with it. So I'm going to continue not to use my eggshells or clam shells. Okay, so this is, remember I told you I talked more about the raspberries where I only use leaves. So this is 2014. 14. So this is after 9 years. Soil pH went up to 7.3. That's even higher. I was kind of surprised about that because I always thought that leaves would make a soil acidic. Well, according to Joe Heckman, said no, they might make it get acidic for a little while they're starting to break down, but once they've broken down, there's actually a lot of calcium in it. They'll make the soil more alkaline. So, but my organic matter was up to 7.3. So he said, that probably your organic matter kind of is so high it probably acts as a buffer. So I said I wouldn't worry too much about it. That's actually I had to take the raspberries out because of a disease. So I haven't taken another test after this, but it just basically shows you what happens if you just use these for fertility. Okay, how are we doing with time?
We have 15 minutes.
Okay. So I'll try to talk a little bit about no-till, another way to help prepare your beds without, and I've had successes and I've had failures. So I'll talk about both. There's some easy ways, basically, just covering with a black tarp for a half a year, a couple months at a time over the winter, whatever, or using some of the, lasagna sandwich methods or whatever, of cardboard and compost and whatever leaves. So those will, pretty much kill the sod and allow you to, plant the next year. You got to plan ahead for these. Again, this is actually, I think it is the lasagna method. Who's it? Some Lanza, I think is she's got a book. Anybody know that? Yeah, she's New England someplace, I believe, but I think it's called the Pizza Garden or something.
And there's also Ruth Stroud who did deep.
Oh yeah, Ruth Stroud. Yeah. So this is going to be planted this year because they're covering this with compost and they're planting right into it. Okay, I talked a little bit about the rye. This is my problem child. So I wanted to come in here. I wanted to not till the soil. Remember those big roots I saw trying to get? I said, what if I can leave those in the ground and just make them die? So a lot of plants will die when they produce seed. So this is just produced the seed. So I went in and I tried to cut it at ground level. So I tried it with my scythe, I tried it with my machete, and then I tried it with a sharpened spade. And what happened in all three methods, the stuff grew right back again. And not right back. But it did create, these tufts lost a lot of their biomass. So I was able to incorporate this with a hoe a little bit easier. So it did have that advantage, but it wasn't exactly no-till. It was an attempt. The other is if you've got a mature cover crop. So this one is rye. I had planted some vetch in here, but it was not a very good establishment. But what I did was I cut that to the ground. And basically I just left it laying there. And then I just kind of made these circles and planted tomatoes right in those circles. Now, not very good cover crop, not very much biomass, and I didn't get the rye. The rye really didn't grow back, so I did kill the rye. I think the vetch, what little vetch was in there, some of it did grow back, but that's easy to pull out. It's kind of very easy to pull out root. Now, I got a little more sophisticated as time went on. So this is a when is this? Okay, early May 10th. A barley and vetch. So it's a grain and it's a vetch. And I wanted to try to plant in this without tilling. I think Karen may be talking more this afternoon about no tillage.
Not just about no tillage.
Okay, yeah. So, having come to these conferences and heard people like Brian Harris and Dan. Brian O'Hara and Dan from Maine, I forget his last name. Kind of get some ideas. So what I did is I went through the back of my rake, and I tamped it down. What do you call that? Crimping it. Yeah. So I crimped it. I basically tried to knock it over. Some of the stems broke. Some of them probably would come back again. So at the end, this is the same bed. It's a little like somebody had walked on it, or with a roller. And then I kind of brought in all the stuff that was hanging into the pathway, plus a little bit of dirt. So you had everything in the middle, covered with a sheet of clear plastic. Now, this basically was a mattress cover. I mean, you can recycle, lots of ways to recycle plastic. That's a thinner plastic. I think actually this was left over when we built the house. It was like 25 years ago. I had this half a roll of plastic left, but it didn't cover the whole bed. So I used, something we got when we got a mattress. I said, I'm going to use that piece of plastic sometime. I don't know how. So Brian O'Hara, who's written a book on no-till, I think he says in the summertime, just leave this on for a day. Otherwise, you're going to kill some of the microbes. But I did it in the early spring, and there's a lot of cloudy days. And so I had it on for about 4 or 5 days. And so I took it off, and this is what it looked like. That was the same green crop. And then this was going to be tomatoes. So basically, I just cleared little spaces in, and I put planted by hand anyways. So it was already a pretty good mulch. It's not a real thick mulch, but it was a mulch, and that worked quite well. I had another crop. This was later in the month. It was May 29th, and this is where I wanted to put my cucurbits in, which I wanted to plant in early June. And this was kind of a mixed crop. There was some wheat and vetch, and in some places it was all clover too. So I found a little bit better way to crimp it. I just found an old board. It happens to be an old locust board that I was using when I grew raspberries. It had the trellis. I already had the 2 holes in it, so I just put put a rope on it, and I just went through and crimped it that way. It was a better crimper. It was a lot easier to work. It didn't cost anything. And basically this is what it looked like. And the same thing, I covered it with plastic. It's a little bit later in the season, so I probably only had this on for 2 days, which was good because I was anxious to get my cucurbits in. So then I said, okay, now what do I do with it? So I had this little this rolling ice pick, I think, and I just went down the middle of it, kind of cut as some no-till mechanical planters will, and then I just kind of spread it, and I just plant one row, my cucurbit plants, one row in the middle. So I was just able to put the seed in right there. So basically this was no-till. Now I didn't get some melons, cucumbers, summer squashes did well. The winter squash didn't do well, but a lot of people didn't have good years for winter squash last year. So I don't know if it was because of something to do with a no-till, but
did you have a drought in New Jersey?
Yeah, hot drought. Yeah. Now here's one issue is that I'm no longer worried about killing the microbes from the plastic because I see it doesn't kill everything. It didn't kill some of the perennials like the dandelion. They just kept coming back up, and then some of I probably had a one with a crop of buckwheat in here last year, and whether it reseeded itself or that's a buckwheat seed that didn't grow last year. It liked the warm condition under that plastic, and that so it grew again. And then the other thing is, here's where my plastic ended. But this is pathway. So I did have to kind of, separate that. Most of that was growing from the pathway into the bed, which is great. But I think that's it, actually. So I didn't give you guys a chance for questions as we went along.
We have about 8 minutes for questions. I probably need like a minute to wrap up. But
Yes, Anna.
Have you ever used crimson clover or red clover with your tomatoes?
You mean growing at the same time?
Or
No,
just so when the plants get adult and everything.
no. I've only with my tomatoes. I plant a grain, wheat, rye, barley, and vetch in the early fall, or actually late summer. But I haven't tried it while it was growing. Yeah. I think, I don't know if I would want to, I might try to do that with white clover, but I think red clover gets too big. I think it might be too aggressive. I think red clover has a taproot. I think crimson clover does too, but I've only planted it a few times and I've never really looked at it that carefully. Whereas the roots from white clover, they're more spreading, like a grass, more like grass. So I don't think they compete with much, because tomato has a taproot too. So I would be a little bit cautious of that. Yes.
With that, like pruning covered with plastic.
Yes.
You had like a really thick, I can't remember what it's called, like a type of, that grass that sort of creeps along the ground and is really thick and hard to get rid of. How long do you think it would take to get rid of that? Like, could it get rid of it in a day?
I have a grass that might fit that description, but it's an annual. Is that, do you think the grass you're talking about is
It's
an
like
annual?
a perennial. It's that grass that just like
Oh.
spreads along the ground.
Would that be what we call crabgrass?
quackgrass and crabgrass do that, right?
Well, crabgrass is, but crabgrass
no.
is perennial.
Right.
Yeah, the
Good call.
crabgrass will spread.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. Crabgrass usually is a later germinating grass. So if my plastic were on there, it would be early in the season. It would kill it. Quackgrass is a perennial that grows by rhizomes, and I don't think it would kill that. It might.
doesn't.
It probably kill the top of it, but
Nothing kills it.
yeah.
I did once clear a 1/4 acre of it, but here's how I did it. I occultated and solarized, so like with the plastic, and then I literally crawled along the ground and just pulled the roots up by hand, and it took me probably 6 hours per bed, and my beds are about 50 feet by 30 inches. So it took an extraordinary amount of time that nobody has.
I have a cow pasture that
Oh, man.
I just bought my property last year. I have a cow pasture that I'm trying to convert into a garden, and it's just full of it. And yeah, every bed takes me at least 4 hours to clear out, and I was just wondering if there's an easier way to
No, I think that's the only way. I think you just have to literally pull up all those rhizomes. But as your soil gets softer, as you raise the organic matter, it will get easier to pull those rhizomes up.
Yeah, I would second that. I've never
Thank you.
been able to find a way to get rid of crabgrass other than manually.
Yeah.
And buckwheat supposedly will smother it out, but I've never found that completely. And my buckwheat beds are only 4 foot wide, so if I've got it on the sides, it's going to come in from the sides again, anyways. It's funny. I grew up here in Worcester, but I lived in New Jersey for 30 years. When I first moved to New Jersey, I did that. I just used to that same thing. I said, "Oh, I've got quackgrass here." And so I went out my first spring down there. I was out with my digging fork I used for that. I didn't have a big patch, but then it never came back again. I think New Jersey is too hot for quackgrass, something like that. But I don't have any answer. I don't have any answer other than that fork. Yeah, Jan.
It all moved to New Hampshire.
Well,
What happens when you tarp something and then like just don't get around to taking the tarp off? Is that, I know it. I'm pretty sure it's killed the crop.
well, with clear plastic or black plastic,
Black plastic.
I don't think it
It's
harms.
never worked for me. It just stays. It just those rhizomes just live, and they'll come back from the brink of death.
Oh, with the quackgrass.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about quackgrass still.
I am talking about black grass. specifically because we had
Yeah.
one section that
Mm.
had.
It's like Lazarus.
Yeah, that's right. Or not wheat. Yeah. So, any other questions? Well, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna pull up our closing slides if I can just figure out how to do that with this. I'm doing